Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about something close to home for me, which is investment properties. So my family has owned rental properties in Nevada County for a long time. They started in the Bay Area, moved here in '89, and we've had it all. We've had residential properties, residential properties, commercial properties, office spaces, retail, some mixed use properties, even some industrial properties here where people are really making things. I just wanted to break down the pros and cons of each type of property, and I feel like I've gotten to see such a wide range of investments in Nevada County just growing up around it, seeing all the different investments that my grandparents have and kind of getting to analyze them from that point of view. So I thought that would be interesting. So whether you're thinking about maybe buying a property, or you're maybe just curious about what it's actually like to own property around here, this one's for you. So let's start off with the one we found to be the easiest to keep rented, and that is residential rentals. And the reason they are so easy to keep rented, what my grandpa always said is everyone needs housing, right? Like if the economy is going up or down, maybe people aren't needing retail space or commercial space as much, but they will always need a place to live. And so residential rentals have been our most consistent keeping things rented out, especially here. There's a pretty big market for housing, and we've never had a problem renting our rentals. And we do try to keep the prices like below market. Like we don't try to just price gouge people just because we can. We do really try to make it affordable and reasonable for people because we are part of this community and we want people to have, decent housing. So the first pro, it's definitely a pro that they're always in demand. It's easiest to keep rented. So that's really nice. You're kind of feeling confident when you buy a property that, okay, I can, find tenants for this. And with other types, you might not be sure who's gonna rent this. Is the economy gonna be good? Will it change if the economy changes? And so with residential rentals, you kind of know this is pretty much going to be a demand around here. It's easy to keep good tenants. Residential is also really nice because it's easier to understand for new investors. I help people buy and sell residential properties all the time, and it really is the most standard. We have these really nice loan products, really nice systems in place. It's really standardized in a way, not fully, but there's a lot of standard procedures, systems, programs for people. So it's a lot easier to buy them. It's easier to wrap your head around. The financing is a lot more straightforward and kind of just conventional, right? So with other types, it gets a little more complicated, but it's easier to understand for new investors, which is nice. You also have really great tax benefits and steady cash flow, which is really, really important, because if you're buying a property to be an investment property, you want to see some return, right? And like I said before, more financing options are available for residential properties. It just makes it a lot easier to acquire, especially if you're going to maybe house hack. Maybe you're going to buy the property, live in it for a year, which is usually the minimum amount of time that you can live in the property, and then rent it out, still getting a owner-occupied loan for the property. So you can buy a residential property with conventional owner-occupied financing, and then after a year, you could turn that into a rental, and you've still got that really good, solid loan program. So that's kind of a little hack, a little trick that a lot of people do to get into these properties. So the cons can be tenant turnover. It's a lot more management. You're dealing with people's lives. They have a lot more stuff. There's a lot more wear and tear on these properties than something like maybe a retail space where, they're open a certain amount of time and then people go home, and there's less wear and tear, less pressure on the water system, the sewer or septic, all these systems just get taxed more. If you are self-managing residential property, there's a lot more calls, a lot more things that you need to fix, because like I said, they're there all the time. This is where people live. If the water is out, they can't just say, oh, it's fine, we'll just, drink our water bottle that day. We don't actually need to take a shower. It's like, no, we actually need to take a shower. We need to use the toilet. We need to have fresh water. It's really important that these things get fixed quickly. HVAC and everything. It's just, you almost need a quicker response time, because this is where people live. And it's really important that we take care of our tenants. So that can be taxing, especially if you're self-managing and you're the one who's taking care of the property. It can be a lot. Another thing with residential rentals, if it's, just a single family house, it's not as scalable as a larger multi-unit. And with financing, so in the financing world, between 1 and 4 units is still considered residential, and then 4 and above is considered commercial. So let's say, for the sake of this conversation, we're talking about 1 to 4 units. It's not as scalable as a larger multi-unit, maybe apartment complex, unless you do have that like 4 unit, maybe it's a 4-plex, and you are able to get conventional financing for residential. But so it's not as scalable. So it's just a thing. Like, rather than replacing 1 roof and it covers, 4 units, you have to replace that roof that covers 1 unit, and you have to maintain the HVACs and the water and the sewer and the septic and all these different systems separately. So it's less scalable than a larger property. There's also rent control laws depending on the unit count and age. So that's something to take in consideration also, because you're dealing with somebody's home and there's a lot more protections than on some of these other types of properties. Okay, so that was residential. Let's talk about commercial office space, we've had that for a number of years. It's been awesome for us. Here's some pros. Usually there's a longer lease term, and we don't always actually do this with our tenants, but in theory, you can see longer lease terms than a year. And tenants usually handle more of their own maintenance. They're a little more self-reliant. This is their office space, this is their office. And sometimes you can also have a triple net lease. So that is when the tenant pays for a lot more of the expenses, taxes, and insurance on the property. And so you as the landlord, it's a lot more passive. It's a lot easier. You're not getting these calls of, oh my gosh, my shower is, coming back up and the septic is all messed up. There's a lot less of those little systems, and this is someone's office space, so it's a little bit of a different dynamic. It can also be a lot more scalable, especially if you have multiple little office spaces in a building. That's nice and scalable, and then you just maintain that one property. Some cons, they can be harder to fill, especially now that remote work has been becoming more popular since the pandemic. And sometimes they can be more challenging to rent. And my mom, she's doing a lot of our, reaching out to find people to rent, and she's really on it. She's really in this community. She's really a fantastic networker, but she's able to rely on that network and her people to help get it filled. But still, we do sometimes have trouble renting them. The economy goes up and down, and sometimes we just have to let it sit a little longer. So it can still sit vacant longer between tenants, and these are more market sensitive in down economies. This is that asset type where if someone doesn't need their office, this is the first thing that they're gonna cut, and they're gonna keep their house, but they're saying, you know what, I'm just gonna work from home because I can't afford my office. So it's a lot more sensitive to economic pressures and what's going on in the broader range. All right, so the next kind of asset type is retail property. So property that's gonna have a retail shop in it. This could be along a road, maybe downtown. There's gonna be some sort of retail tenant, okay? So the pros for this type of property, you can have really stable cash flow, especially if it's in a great location that's traveled well. It's just super stable. You have a strong business in there. If it's a good location and a good business, they're never gonna wanna leave, okay? They're never gonna wanna leave. They're gonna wanna pay you the rent, and you're gonna have a little bit more flexibility, you know, maybe charging a little bit more because this is such a good location. So location is definitely everything. You have an opportunity for strong tenant relationships with these folks, really to dive in and take a long time to develop these relationships, because it seems like a lot of times, at least in my experience, these folks stay because if they've developed their business here, they're using that location as part of their marketing. People get to know the location. They're not gonna want to move a lot, and that makes sense, right? Like if you're opening a shop, let's say downtown Nevada City or in Grass Valley somewhere, you're not gonna wanna be moving frequently. So both parties seem to work together a lot better to just develop really strong tenant relationships with each other. And so that's really nice. Triple net leases are also common on this type of property. My family, we don't really do that. We do pass along a lot of the utilities and things and some of the maintenance, but it's really case by case basis. Some of them have their own insurance, but we don't really require it. We just never have. But I think it depends on the area. Like we are in a really unique area, and sometimes maybe in different areas they would have like a really strong triple net lease if it's a strip mall, things like that. We don't have a whole lot of that here. So at least my family's properties, they're a little more unique. And so we don't really enforce the triple net lease, but we still, you know, there's still good tenants. We still get a good return. Okay, so some cons, changing consumer habits. When people start shopping online, there might be less demand for retail. And that's true. At least for us, we just have like really unique tenants and they're awesome. We love them so much and they can't be replaced by online shopping. And luckily here in Nevada County, we have such a tight-knit community. But there is a vacancy risk in small towns just because we don't have those like bigger chains that can absorb economic shifts and keep going. So there is that risk. Some businesses fail quickly and that can create turnover, which is a bummer. We never want our tenants to go out of business, but that can happen. And that is a little bit of a risk because if the business goes under, you know, that creates, you know, vacancy for you, right? So next we have industrial property. And my family, we had a few units up at the airport and they were like industrial properties. What was really nice is it was low maintenance tenants. They just need a space to do their work. They really just need a roof over their head and some electricity, and they're just there to work and get things done and make things. There is a growing demand from trades, logistics, and storage. Even in this area, like you'd be surprised how much stuff gets made here, how much distribution is here. It's kind of awesome. And there were also longer leases, which was really nice. But some of the cons, it can be hard to repurpose if a tenant leaves. So sometimes our tenants would bring in equipment, build stuff out in the property, and then if they leave, it's like this really specific way it's set up now, and it can be a little awkward. There's also potentially not as many buyers if you ever want to sell the property. We did sell a couple of them before. We actually ended up selling them to our tenants. Another con is some of them have an HOA. My family is really anti-HOA. They hated it, so they did end up selling some of them because it felt like we didn't have as much control over our own property, which it just depends. You know, the HOA was helping, you know, maintain the property and everything. My family just didn't really like it. All right, next we have mixed use properties. So the pros, diversifies your tenant risk. So if you have a mixed use, say you have some retail with some apartments upstairs, or restaurant with some apartments, or restaurant and retail, right? So that's what I mean by mixed use. It can command a higher value if well located. It's awesome to have like a shop and apartments. It just expands your risk and you can get good rents, okay? So, and the residential part, if it does have residential, it will help cover the property if the commercial property ends up sitting vacant. So residential is always a little less risky, maybe a little less potential reward also. But if you have that nice mix, they kind of balance each other out and you can ride the wave, still manage to pay your mortgage and everything if you're getting a loan on it, and have the different tenant types kind of balance each other out within one property. You could also do this within your portfolio as a whole and still get the same kind of effect that I'm talking about. But it is kind of nice to have that in one property too, especially if this is, you don't have a large portfolio. So the cons, it can be complex to manage, different lease structures within the same building. It can get a little complicated, making sure you have the utilities all split up correctly. Financing is definitely trickier to receive when you buy it, and also for the next buyer if you ever want to sell it. Zoning and insurance can get complicated. These properties are a little odd sometimes. We recently had a few of our mixed use properties appraised, and they were very expensive to appraise because it takes a lot of time to understand the properties, and there's a lot more that goes into them. So the value can be harder to understand. So watch out for that if you're thinking of buying one, and understand that when you go to sell it, it might be a little harder to sell because of the complexity. It's not to say it's bad, it just requires a little bit more sophistication of the owner operator. And so that can weed out some potential buyers. Okay, so here's what some people don't realize about owning rental properties. It's a business. This is a business, okay? It's really not passive. You can pay people to run it, but then even in that case, you're managing the manager, and I've seen people do that. It still gives you a headache, okay? It's still work. You're dealing with maintenance and deferred maintenance. If you put maintenance off, it gets worse. You have to do your bookkeeping, you have to do your taxes, and tenant issues, even if you don't have to evict. And, luckily my family, we've never had to evict anyone, but we have had to do some really nasty cleanups, which is gross. We've had to clean up some really nasty properties when people move out and leave it looking disgusting. Okay, so that's never fun. And this business, if you want to get into it, it requires long-term financial planning. This isn't just okay, I buy a property and I can go move to frickin', Bali and never work, and this is just my one property, it's my life and I'm great. It's like, no, this is a long-term play. It might take a while to pay off, and you need to be able to exist. And what if it's vacant for 6 months? Like, can you hold the property for that long, or are you actually relying on it? It's always safer to be able to cover the property with your business, with your job, with whatever else you have going on. And this can be an added bonus to your life, but don't just think it's an easy quick fix, because it's just not. Like, people need to hear this. It's not an easy quick fix. This is a long-term play. It requires tenacity, and it will take some time to see those returns, because you think, oh, I have all this cash flow, cool. But you need to save it, because what happens when you need to replace your roof? You need to make sure you have reserves. Reserves. It's the name of the game. But I'm truly so for helping people build wealth through real estate if they're interested in investing. It's changed my family's life. It's changing my life. It's something I really believe in, and I really want to help people do the same thing. So real wealth comes from buying great deals, okay? This is the secret sauce. I've learned this from my grandpa. Honestly, it's not from cash flow. It's literally buying great deals when you buy it, okay? Equity gains over time is how you build wealth. Cash flow helps, but appreciation builds wealth, okay? I really need people to understand that, because I feel like in the last few years, people have become obsessed with cash flow. For good reason, of course. We want our properties to be healthy investments that are, giving us a return. If our money's not making money for us, it's lazy and it needs to get a better job, do a better job for us, right? But appreciation really builds wealth over time. There's so many tax benefits to real estate. We got depreciation, we got step up in basis, we got all these write-offs, and real estate is a wonderful way to build generational wealth. So I love this quote, okay? Cash flow helps you hold onto the property, but appreciation is what builds long-term wealth. And you can have appreciation in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people that talk about it, but basically buy a really good deal, hold on to it. If you think the market's going up, hold on to it, buy right, hold, sell when you want to, okay? So if you're thinking about investing in Nevada County in the real estate market here, or you're just trying to figure out what kind of property might make sense for you in your investing journey, I hope this video helps you get some perspective from someone who has grown up in a real estate investing real estate investing household experience, sorry. So I hope this helped. So drop your questions in the comments, subscribe if you want more local real estate tips, news, tours, the whole shebang, okay? See you in the next vid.